Today's episode is part 2 of our conversation with Matt Martingale of the Elias Sports Bureau. We have a fun and nostalgic conversation about our hometown New York Mets, and in particular about the 80s and early 90s teams. We hope you enjoy us reliving some Mets memories next on Beat the Shift. We gotta talk some Mets here. We got 3 big Mets fans. Now, you're a little bit older than us, Matt. You were born in the 70s, so you remember the 80s pretty well. But first of all, can you tell us what led to you growing up being a Mets fan?
I think it's weird. There are very few decisions in life that you make at such an early age that you're kind of, in a lot of cases, stuck with for the rest of your life. I think, when I was a little kid, probably before I even knew I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in New York. At a time where the Yankees, late 70s, was before I started watching baseball, but the Yankees were at the time, the best team. They won the World Series in both 77 and 78, and they were the obvious choice of any front-running fan in New York at the time. And I just decided I wanted to do something different. Now, most of my relatives were Yankee fans, and I just, I guess I was always a little bit of a contrarian, and that's why I picked them, So I didn't really start following the team until 1982. And it's really funny because I was 8 years old in 1982, but it's my memories of that. Not just that, they get a little clearer as the years go on. But I remember things from that year that I would never imagine that an 8-year-old would remember. It's that I remember, I remember the first game that we went to that year. I actually wrote a blog post about it a couple of years ago. It was a game against it was a Mets-Reds game. Tom Seaver pitched against the Mets, and Dave Kingman hit a home run in the first inning. That's what I remember about that game. And the 1982, the Mets actually they were coming off, I think, 5 or 6 straight really bad years, and they got off to a really good start. Really good. They weren't in first place, but by the Mets standards, they were over 500 into late May, which was considered huge progress for them at the time. And that's when I started rooting for them. And unfortunately, they totally collapsed. I think they won. I think they were 4-27 in August or something like that, and they ended up in last place again. But yeah, so that became. I just became obsessed with the team. I started following them. I watched or listened to almost every game. Back then there was no cable TV in my neighborhood of Brooklyn, so any game that was not on WOR I would have to listen to on the radio. But I think I learned a lot. That's not necessarily even a bad thing. I think you certainly, I think in some ways you learn more or as much when you're listening on the radio as when you're watching on TV. So, yeah. So I think it was contrarianism. If I have to distill it down to one word, I just I wanted to be different, and I wasn't the only Mets fan in my class, but we were definitely in the minority. And a lot of the gradually over the few years after that, because the team started to get good in 1984, and they really overtook the Yankees in popularity very quickly. I know it's probably hard for anybody who's under the age of 35 now probably would not believe me when I said that New York was actually a Mets town for most of the years. But it really was. Yes. And they, I think it was it was the players. I mean, Doc Gooden probably the number one, but Darryl Strawberry too were just such exciting players to watch, and I think that's and they were a fun team. The Yankees were still actually pretty good, but they weren't able to win any divisions, and that was the peak of the Steinbrenner era, where he was firing managers twice a year and bringing in new players. And I think probably people were getting sick of him at the time too. That's kind of what. That's kind of what led to, and the Mets from 80, I think probably outdrew the Yankees. Probably every year between 1984 and 92 or 93, and and they had better TV.
Oh, I remember going to games the late 80s, early 90s, and you go on a Sunday, and the upper deck, and by the way, Shea Stadium was a lot bigger than Citi Field. the upper deck from end to end was packed. They would do the wave. The whole stadium. It was. I mean, we drew on every single day. It was
And
exciting.
then
to
you
go
look
to.
at the Yankee Stadium, Don Mattingly hitting these upper deck home runs, and the upper deck is completely empty in all those videos. You just turn on and watch those things. I mean, they didn't start packing the stadium until '93 and '94. I mean, I remember Shea Stadium. I remember it shaking. I mean, you're talking about also in the late '90s. Also, the stadium shakes. But that's when it really started. That's when I got into baseball. Bob Murphy on the radio. If you've never heard him have any calls, just listen to the call of Mookie Wilson ground ball.
The
I
line
mean,
drive trickling down. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I mean it just almost as good as all the other announcers who have done that. I mean he's one of the best, and he actually started the team of him and Gary Cohen started on WFAN I think in 1987, and both of those guys, I mean Bob Murphy propelled Gary Cohen to what he is today, and how popular he is with Met fans today, just because he knows so much about the Mets because he's been around them for so long.
By the way, Ruvain, how did you end up being a Met fan? Because I know, I think your mom was a Bronx gal, and she still is a big Yankees fan,
Nope,
right?
nope. She grew up a Met fan.
Oh,
She went to the '69
what am I
World
getting wrong
Series.
then?
She only became a Yankee fan after Derek Jeter.
Oh, okay.
Derek Jeter converted her to a Yankee fan. That was the thing. She was all Mets all the time.
Because I
Darryl
go over to
Strawberry
your
was her
house, I
favorite
remember,
player.
and your mom's listening to the Yankee fan, and you're like, Mom, Yankees, and I'm like, what? She's a Yankee fan? You're a Mets fan? Just weird.
Her favorite player of all time is Tom Seaver.
Oh, okay.
I mean, just put it that way. We have she has tons of rookie of baseball cards of Tom Seaver. She has a Tom Seaver bobblehead. Tom Seaver was her favorite player by far. So she was a Met fan, but because the Mets are so up and down, up and down, up and down, and Derek Jeter gave the Yankees such stability, she went over to the stability side, and we're left with the up and down roller coaster.
Interesting. For me, my father grew up a New York Giants fan. I mean, Willie Mays was his favorite player. I mean, my dad's favorite year, he moved to Queens when he was 11 in 1954, and the Giants won the World Series. And naturally, after they moved to San Francisco, my dad followed the new National League baseball team, which was the Mets. And I remember he showed us the games we were watching. We always went to about 6 or 7 Met games a year. We would sit in the upper deck, cheap tickets. There was always one game a year that my dad splurged. Either we got upper deck box, or we even got field level. We went to scalpers, and $20 a ticket, which was a lot back then. But we did that one game a year. I remember going to that, and yeah, that's how I became a Met fan. It's funny though. When the Rockies came, I was very quickly a big Rockies fan for a couple years. I still love the Mets, but I just followed the team, and those Rockies teams where you had 4 40 homers guys and 5 35 homer guys with Bichette, Dante Bichette, Andres Galarraga, Larry Walker. I mean, those were a lot of fun.
Vinny Castilla.
Ellis Burks. I mean, the Blake Street Bombers was the nickname. So very briefly, I follow the Rockies, but I don't really follow them now. It's just I follow them because I know baseball, but I don't root for them anymore. But yeah, that's how it came for me. Is there a favorite Met game, Matt, that you remember going to in the 80s or even early 90s?
So I actually prepared a favorite game. I did not actually attend this game. But my favorite Mets game of all time, actually, I looked it up. The date was July 22nd, 1986, and I actually wrote a blog about this a couple of years ago too. This game, it was the game most famous for the fight between Eric Davis and Ray Knight. But it was incredible. It took some incredible circumstances for it to ever get to that point. And the Mets were down 2 runs in the bottom of the 9th with 2 out, and Keith Hernandez up, who hit a routine fly ball to Dave Parker, the right fielder, who's a borderline Hall of Fame player, great player, and he just botched it. He dropped it. 2 runs scored to tie the game to send it into extra innings, and then 10th inning. Eric Davis, who was, I think, pinch running at the time, slid into third base on a stolen base attempt and came up, and he and Ray Knight just all of a sudden started wailing on each other. I still to this date, I'm not really sure what caused it, but it was one of that was the Mets' fourth on-field fight that season, which is kind of incredible to think about. And I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure it was the first of those four in which anybody was ejected. That it was a different.
I feel like there was more fighting back then. Is it?
There
am
was.
I making it up? Yeah.
No, definitely. You're right, and they did not really seem to. A pitcher could throw. There could be a big fight, and the batter and pitcher would not even be ejected from the game half the time. Yeah. So yeah, that was one of the that was a pretty vicious fight, and they ended up they ejected Knight and Kevin Mitchell, and I think Darryl Strawberry had already been ejected earlier in the game for arguing balls and strikes. So what that meant was the Mets were out of position players, so they only had 7 position players left. So Davey Johnson had to put a pitcher in the outfield. So I don't remember who was pitching first, but what he ended up doing was
Orozco was pitching first.
Okay, yeah, Jesse Orozco and
You
Roger
remember the game,
McDowell
Ruben?
Yes, I do. I know the game. That was a game where Gary Carter ended up playing third base. I remember the game very vividly.
Right. Yes. So Davey Johnson actually alternated McDowell and Orozco in the outfield depending on who was batting. He would bring Orozco in to pitch when there was a lefty up, and McDowell in to pitch when there was a righty. And Pete Rose was the manager of the Reds and protested, saying that she shouldn't be allowed to do that. But apparently that was legal.
Can't do that anymore, right? It takes the fun away, right?
You're not allowed to do that anymore?
minimum.
No, you
Oh, yeah,
have to
right.
pitch to 3 batters, right?
Right. So anyway, and then in the couple innings later, the reason I did a blog about this was because Keith Hernandez turned one of the most unbelievable double plays I've ever seen in my life in that game. Ruben was saying Gary Carter was playing third base. There were runners on first and second, and Keith Hernandez. The Reds had a relief pitcher batting. Carl Willis was the guy's name. So not a very inexperienced batter. So it was obvious to the entire world that there was going to be a bunt there. Keith Hernandez charged in, fielded the ball on the third base side of the pitcher's mound. That's how far he got in, about 5 feet in front of the mound. Threw it to Gary Carter, who is playing one of only 2 career games that he played at third base, who picked it and then made a great throw across the diamond to Tim Tuffle, who was the second baseman. It was a 3-5-4 grounded into double play. Just an amazing play, and if you watch the video, if you can find the video of it on YouTube, you should try. Ralph Kiner's doing the game, and he says he describes Keith Hernandez's throw to third as an easy throw to third base. And I think to myself, well, it was easy only because he was practically standing in front of like nobody would, he really could have, if a decent hitting pitcher could have legitimately hurt him. He could have just a line drive might have killed him at that point, But he made that play. Keith was just so much better defensive first baseman than anybody I've ever seen. It was just, but that's my all-time favorite play of his.
It's so funny because I was going to mention my favorite game was another brawl game. Now I remember a lot of Met games, but I'm a little bit younger than you.
Which one? Because mine is a brawl also. So let's see if we're the same one.
Mine is now. Remember, I'm younger than you guys. In 1986, I was just 4. I actually attended the parade. My dad tells me that I was at the 1986 Mets parade. I don't remember it at all. But so
that parade took place about 12 hours after they won the World Series.
Oh, really?
The players Keith Hernandez and it was he showed up in the shirt that he slept in, and Doc Gooden never showed up at all. Unfortunately, that was
right. Well, I was there. But I mean, my memories are more in the 90s. So I'll give you a game from 1993. Gary Sheffield stealing signs. And Todd Hundley, who was not the main catcher, he was the backup catcher back then, but he sort of had it out with him, and he had a tiff, and you just see from up the upper deck, you see Sheffield just arguing with Hundley, and all of a sudden it just went brawl, and it was funny because Gary Sheffield's godfather is none other than, you guys know?
Dwight Gooden.
Gooden.
Also his uncle.
Yeah, and he wasn't pitching that game, Gooden, but but he was there, and it was so funny because I remember the first guy going out to stop Sheffield was Gooden. Usually you don't have a member of the same team pulling back a guy, but that's his godfather. So that was just fun. And I've never seen a brawl before in a game. I was, 11 years old, whatever it is, and what's going on? What's going on there? Oh, they're having a brawl, son. So that was just fun. I don't even remember who won, but I remember that game so vividly. And that's one of the earliest games I remember as to what happened in the game. I went to many games before then, but I just remember going to it. I don't remember the actual things of the game.
Yeah, I remember two brawls that I went to, which is crazy. One was when Gooden got hit by a pitch after he hit a home run, and he charged him out. That was great. But I think the best one was Kevin Elster. He was a Gold Glove caliber shortstop at the time. I think he had the record for most games played in consecutively without making an error. He was they were playing the Padres, and I was at the game, and he got hit by a pitch, and he charged them out, and he was never the same after that. But what made me a Met fan from life after that was while the brawl was going on, the entire crowd was chanting "Let's go Mets." It was the funnest thing, and it made us all feel like a group, like a family, like we're all rooting for the Mets to literally beat up the other team.
Oh, I mean, I remember. You remember these odd. It's funny how you remember these oddball things. I remember the first streaker at Citi Field. I was at that game. It was also the first extra inning game at Citi Field against the Braves, and you see a ball, regular foul ball hit down the line, and you follow it. Oh, the foul, and this one went maybe the third row in the field level, and all of a sudden, where that ball went. Well, there goes the streaker. It was like planned perfectly. He obviously planned that as soon as the ball is going to come right by me, I'm going to go. And then you see the guy and he's wearing, I don't know, a diaper or something like that. Sorry, a monkey doll. That's his only bit of clothing. He, of course, took it off. And then you watch the police go with the tasers. Funny how you remember these ridiculous things.
I was at the first game of the 1995 season, which was right after the strike, and a lot of fans were quite mad at the time, and probably 7 or 8, maybe I might even be undercounting it, fans at various times of that game took off onto the field, including one who successfully made it over the center field fence and, as far as I know, escaped any punishment.
This is good stuff. By the way, who is your favorite Mets announcer of all time, Matt?
That's a good question. The Mets have, for all their flaws as a team, they've always had good announcers.
Yes.
I think Gary Cohen is the best. Just based on service, he's been there since I think 1989 is actually his first year with the team. You guys probably don't remember this, but the guy he replaced was Gary Thorne,
Yes.
who you probably know was probably best known as a hockey announcer for ESPN for many years, but he did Oriole games.
Orioles, yeah.
And he was very good. The reason the Mets fired him was because he was doing New Jersey Devils games on TV, and he missed some Mets games to do playoff games, and the Mets really didn't like that, so they got rid of him and they brought in another Gary Cohen, and yeah, he worked with Bob Murphy for I think like 15 years, and then when SNY came around in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, the Mets were their first. They tried to hire somebody better known nationally. I think Dave O'Brien might have been the guy that they really wanted to hire, and I think they couldn't get whoever they wanted would not agree to do. They wanted to avoid the Gary Thorne situation from years earlier. They didn't want to have somebody who would duck away from the team to do national TV games. I think Dave O'Brien is the guy. I could be wrong, but he still did some work for ESPN and everything like that. So Gary Cohen was kind of like their second or third choice, I think, and they really it was just extremely fortunate. He had never really done much TV before, so I think. Early on, when SNY started, it took him a little bit a while to adjust to doing TV instead of radio. He was a little bit too verbose in his calls, but his chemistry with Keith Hernandez and Ron Darling is just incredible. I mean, those guys, Gary Cohen and also Howie Rose on the radio side, the Mets are so lucky that they have two guys working for the team as announcers who are doing what literally was their dream job, the only thing they ever wanted to do. It's those two guys. All they ever wanted to do was be. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think I've heard them both say it. That they wanted to be announce Mets games for their entire life growing up as a kid, and that's what they did. And somebody like Gary Cohen, he could have easily, I'm sure, gotten a job, doing games for Fox or ESPN or something like that. He's definitely good enough. But
and Kevin can you imagine Kevin Burkhardt, who was just the play-by-play, here's the funny stuff. Now he's the national baseball announcer, national football announcer. Can you believe that story?
It's incredible.
Selling used cars, and then you know what? Why don't you talk about the hot dogs at Citi Field? Okay, and next thing you know, he's bigger than Gary Cohen right now.
They often tease their current sideline guy, Steve Gelbs, and say, hey, the last guy who did this is not calling the Super Bowl.
By the way, this is usually the part that I would bait the guest on the show saying that, Gary Cohen is my uncle, and they go, really? But I know you listen to our show. You probably have heard the joke already.
Yeah.
Gary Cohen, no relation. Although he did go to the same bowling alley as me for a period of time.
That's something.
Yes,
that's definitely something. Yeah.
Different night,
Okay.
but I'm told he always bowled there Friday nights. I was there a lot on Saturday night, Sunday, and a lot of people are like, yeah, Gary Cohen was here last night. So we'd hear about him regularly at the bowling lane, which is now defunct. It was Utopia Lanes on Union Turnpike. I actually wanted to buy the mat that said Utopia Lanes. I was going to offer $1,000 for it. I just needed my mom to pick it up, and my mom's like, it was very dirty. I don't want to put it. I don't want to touch it. I'm like, no, buy it. And they sold it to somebody else. Thank you. It's okay, Mom. $1,000 is not necessary for a mat that says Utopia Lanes. But yeah, Ruben, who's your favorite announcer?
My favorite announcer is Bob Murphy, by far. I mean, everyone learned from Bob Murphy. He had the stories of the older players. He was the announcer from 1962, basically until he couldn't do it anymore. I fell asleep listening to him every night. The radio's under my pillow, listen to those games. He would tell these stories of the players from years past, and basically almost all my baseball knowledge comes from him because he told these stories of all the players from 62 on. Bob Gibson, talking about interviewing these guys and everything like that, and it was just a pleasure listening to him. And he's the one who made the term happy recap. And the Mets always, whenever they win, they always used to have a happy recap, and he was known for that. That was the thing. I believe he's in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, I think he's as an announcer.
He's in the what they call the broadcasters wing. Yeah,
he's in the broadcaster wing of the Hall of Fame, and when it comes down to it, Gary Cohen may end up there, and Howie Rose will probably end up there also, because it's just that yes we are homers and we're Met fans and we like these announcers, but if you ever listen to them, they're fans of the team, and they know so much about the team. It's ridiculous. They're like encyclopedias of the team. So it's not like they're just doing it as a job or anything like that. This is their passion. This is what they love to do, and you hear it in their voices when they call the games.
Oh, so I used to listen to Gary Cohen on the radio. I actually think he's a much better radio announcer than he is TV announcer.
I agree.
Definitely. Not that he's a bad TV announcer. He's fantastic, but he just would describe the game so well and the flow, and you could just talk. I'm like you. I went to sleep listening to games. I mean, I still have insomnia. I had really bad insomnia when I was younger, and that's what I listened to. Just put on the Met game right behind my boombox, right behind my head, and just listen to the guys on the radio. And even sometimes when I would watch games, I would turn off the TV sound and I would listen to the radio call. There was no delay back then, right? There was no 7-second delay, or if you're watching on cable, it was a 30-second delay. It was no delay. You could literally do that back then, and Gary Cohen was just fantastic. I liked everybody. I loved Kiner's Corner, and Ralph Kiner did the TV.
Kiner and Tim McCarver.
Tim
were a
McCarver,
great pair.
yeah. McCarver was amazing.
McCarver has become kind of a I don't know what he's kind of a polarizing figure. I know he passed away a few years ago, but he he did become a little bit of a parody of himself when he became a national guy. But when in the '80s with the Mets, he was so good, and he and Kiner were a great team.
Best color guy. I mean, he used to. What I loved about Tim McCarver is he would talk about the situation and he would say, "I don't know if they should have done that. Maybe a play over. Why the Mets?" And sure enough, they'd hit it the other way. Like he would give you the baseball sense. Wouldn't just describe the play, but McCarver would tell you about baseball. I learned a lot of baseball from Tim McCarver because you think, and when I play baseball now, I'm always thinking, wait, should he stand over? What's this guy going to do? It's that thinking. He was phenomenal. I think the best pair on TV. I love the current guys, but to me, Gary Cohen's the radio guy. McCarver and Kiner are the TV guys. So, before we go any further, we've got a little bit of trivia. It's time for the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
So I'm going to gear this a little. We were talking about the '80s Mets and everything, so I'm going to gear this a little toward 1986. And if this is too easy, I do have other trivia just in case. But in 1986, 5 Mets made the All-Star game. Who were they?
Matt?
Let's see. Well, Dwight Gooden.
That's 1.
Gary Carter.
That's 2.
Keith Hernandez.
That's 3.
Strawberry?
Strawberries 4.
Strawberries 4, yep.
So who's the missing one?
Maybe a pitcher?
Is it Sid Fernandez?
Yes, Sid Fernandez. He's the forgotten guy.
He'd have had his best
guy...
year in '88, right?
No, he had his best
no.
year in '86.
Oh,
really.
86?
86
Yeah.
did. Yeah. Okay, so that was a little bit too easy. So what about this one? Of the teams, of the players who played on the 1986 team, of the 1986 Mets, who ended up with the most career World Series rings?
Is it Strawberry?
Yes, it is Darryl Strawberry. He ended up with 4. 1 with the Mets, 3 with the Yankees. I mean, he didn't finish the '99 season, but he did get 1 for that. And this is a bonus one. You have to be a really, really diehard Met fan to know this. In I think it was either 86 or 87, the Mets made a promotional video called Think Big. There were 3 people on it. Which Mets were the 3 Mets that were promoting the Mets in that promotional video? This is a really tough trivia question.
Okay, I got to admit I don't remember that one.
Okay, so maybe that's too hard. Okay, so but the answer, I'll throw out a different one because Mookie Wilson's one of them. Yes. Are you googling it?
No. Because he was always the mouth.
Yes.
Right. He was the mouth of the team, so that's why I mentioned him.
Yes.
I'm gonna say Keith Hernandez.
Keith Hernandez was not on it. It was Gary Carter and Roger McDowell.
Carter would have been my next guess.
So
he was also big mouth.
And I have one more. Listen, I'm a big Mets fan, so I have all this trivia. One more question. Keith Hernandez appeared on Sesame Street once. Who was with him? What other Met player was with him on Sesame Street?
I know this one because I've seen the picture online. It's Mookie Wilson. And they have a picture taken him with the count.
Yes. It is
One
Mookie
strike,
Wilson. Yes.
2 strikes, 3 strikes,
Yes.
you're out.
Yes. Wow. Okay. So you knew that one. Okay.
I don't remember the episode. I was probably a little too old for Sesame Street at the time, but I have seen that picture.
Well, I think Keith Hernandez was in the most TV videos or TV shows after that. I think he was in one episode of Law and Order. Obviously, he was on Seinfeld at one point. I think he got the most out of it. He ended up being the spokesman for Just for Men for a while for coloring his mustache.
Yeah.
I mean,
The slogan was "Stay in the game," and they would show him.
Yes.
Of course, it would be Rogaine or Just for Men, and this call to the bullpen was sponsored by Just for Men, and their slogan "Stay in the game," even though they're taking the guy out.
But it just shows how big this team was, how iconic a lot of the players was, which is why ESPN made that 30 for 30 about the 1986 team. If you never saw it, you got to see it.
And Keith Hernandez was on 2 episodes of Seinfeld. You guys know which or the second? Well, the one, obviously the famous one he was on where he dated Elaine, and nobody mentioned that ball game as their favorite, right? Where he spit on the other guy spit on. What was the second one that he was on?
He was on the finale.
Yeah,
I don't think he had any lines in that, but he was there.
No.
He just waved and said hello. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So, Matt, who is your favorite Met of the 80s, 90s, 80s, early 90s?
It's hard for me to name just one because I went through different phases of different favorite players. But my first favorite one when I started rooting for the team was in 1982 was Dave Kingman, who had led the league in National League with 37 home runs and was pretty much lousy at everything else in baseball. But he hit long home runs. You guys, I don't know if you guys remember him, but he would hit long, high home runs. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a player since him whose home runs like went as high in the air as he did. But obviously he was, not really a great player. He was replaced. They traded for Keith Hernandez the next year, who basically took his job as first baseman. And Keith, and then Dwight Gooden were probably my two favorites, for going through the '86 championship year. And then once you got into the late '80s, David Cohn, who joined the team in '87, the year after they won, he was always one of my favorite pitchers. I was really bummed when they traded him, although they actually ended up making a good trade for him. They got Jeff Kent for him. Of course, they couldn't hold on to Jeff Kent, so they couldn't make any use of it. But yeah, those were
Jeff
my
Kent trade. Oh,
Jeff Kent had a very bad relationship with the New York media, and I think that that contributed to his.
I met him.
exit.
I remember going. We went in the winter. The Mets were selling tickets for the first time, and they had the baseball players, a bunch of them, come, and they were serving like hot chocolate and whatever. And I remember going up to Jeff Kent, asking for an autograph. Hey, you want some hot chocolate? And there you go. It was him. We had Rico Bronya. They were so cordial. Then we went inside the Shea Stadium, and John Franco was there, and he wasn't as friendly. We got an autograph, but he was like, hey, yeah. But I remember Jeff Kent was actually really, really nice to us.
That's good to know. That's not usually his reputation.
Well, we were Jeff Kent fans. We liked him. Ruvain, who's your favorite player of that era?
I had two, and they overlapped a little bit. Howard Johnson, Hojo. I mean, I mirrored when I was younger. I mirrored my game after him. I started playing third base because of him. He was a consistent 30-30 guy. He hit these monstrous home runs. He had great speed. He was a pretty good third baseman at the time. And another guy who was my favorite, and a friend of the show. He was on our show as well. Beat the Shift. And another guy who I really liked, who was very, very underrated, and he came to the team after the '86 season, and that's Kevin McReynolds. He was the number 5 hitter for the Mets for years. He was the model of consistency. He was a quiet guy. I mean, he started off with the Padres, and he came to the Mets, and he was one of the quiet guys on the team. I mean, he would steal bases. I think he had a record at a time he had the most consecutive stolen bases without being caught for a while. I know I had that baseball card, I think, from 1989, where he did that in '88. So he was really good at that, and he played really good defense, and he had a good arm in the outfield. And all I remember is a lineup of, I think it was Keith Hernandez, Darryl Strawberry, Kevin McReynolds. I think those are the 3, 4, 5 Mets hitters for like 4 or 5 years in a row. And those 3 guys were such feared hitters that when you knew those 3 guys were coming up, you would not move away from the TV or go get a hot dog from that stand if you're in the stadium.
I liked Kevin McReynolds too. As you said, he was a very quiet guy, and he kind of, a lot of the fans kind of disliked him for that, which I never really quite understood. But the problem with his legacy, I guess, is that he traded Kevin Mitchell to get him, who won the MVP a couple of years later.
Kevin McReynolds, he was the guy that he had the same expression whether he popped out and got out or hit a grand slam to win the game. Okay, like he was like no emotion ever. That's what I remember.
He reminded me of John Olerud a lot. Very same demeanor, very quiet, just getting the job done, and just not a lot of fanfare. But remember, everyone at the team had a personality, and when someone comes to the team that doesn't have a personality, they kind of stand out that they don't.
And Howard Johnson, who, by the way, was on the Beat the Shift podcast, he was such a nice guy, by the way, such a nice guy. He was my father's favorite player of that era. All-around game, extra base hits. I remember playing RBI Baseball 93 on the Sega Genesis. I think it was also on Nintendo. And if you take like the old '86 teams, he was a monster. Or maybe his best year was '88. It was the odd years, right? '87 or whatever his best year was. I think it was '87.
Yeah, he was good in odd years and had rough time in even 87, 89, and 91. He was great all those years.
Yeah. So I think it was '87, maybe '89, one of those odd years, and he was like a monster in that game. Just everything he would hit out in the video game.
And he's the answer for a trivia question. He was the guy standing on deck when Mookie Wilson hit the ball through Bill Buckner's legs.
Oh yes, it was. Were you about to ask that, Ruve?
No, I think we've nailed enough trivia questions for today.
That was after the previous inning in the eighth or ninth inning, Hojo came up in a bunting situation and didn't get one down, and then like, and I blame the manager more than him, but like he failed to get the bunt down on the first one, and then Davey Johnson took off the bunt sign, which the announcers Vince Scully and Joe Garagiola just went apoplectic when they saw that he wasn't bunting, and they ended up striking out. If he had gotten a bunt down in the eighth or ninth inning, they might have not needed extra innings in that game.
Well, my favorite player was Darryl Strawberry. This guy was so skinny, and yet he would just mash the ball. Unbelievably terrible that he was traded to the Dodgers. And if you remember, Howard Johnson was quite upset that he was traded to the Dodgers. And in protest, he switched his number temporarily to 44. And when we had Howard Johnson on the podcast, we noted that, well, who currently wears number 20, which was Howard Johnson's number, that's Pete Alonso. And in one of those home run derbies, the one that we right before we had Hojo on, he wore 44 because it was a tribute to Hank Aaron, and that was the same number that Hojo, and we brought it up on the show, and he's like, oh my God, wow, same switching numbers to that exact number. So, but Darryl Strawberry was my favorite player. I also love Doc Gooden. I mean, Doc Gooden was the fastest guy to reach 100 wins up to that point. He was just absolutely amazing. I mean, Rookie of the Year, next year Cy Young, the next year World Series. That guy was unbelievable. And Doc Gooden last year was actually supposed to play a game in my league. I was actually supposed to pitch against him. It didn't happen. I'm so upset. Oh, I was looking forward to facing and pitching against Doc Gooden. I don't know if he'd be any good. I'm sure if he hits the ball, it can go a long way. But
he was a good hitting pitcher.
He was a very good hitting
good,
pitcher.
good,
yes.
Yeah. Very good.
But he's also what? He was a 60. He must be late 60, 70 right now. Right?
I think he's 60. I think he was born in 64. He was
okay. Well, 60. How would he fare now? I mean, as a major league player and hitter, he's got tons of homers. How would I fare against him pitching wise? I don't know. We'll never find out. But last year was almost like I heard. Oh no, he just canceled on me. So there you go. All right. Well, anyways, this is a really great and fun episode. Went a little bit long today, but we were having so much fun talking about the Mets, talking about some strategy, talking about a bunch of outfielders and catchers. So thank you so much, Matt, for coming on the show. Why don't you tell us where we can see your stuff and all things Matt Martingale?
Yeah, well, first of all, no, thank you for having me. That's a great pleasure. I've been listening to you guys for several years, and just an honor to be on your show. I have a Twitter account. I don't really use it all that much, but I am at Matt Martingale, MattMartingale. And I have a blog, which there's a link to my blog. It's Substack's on there. Which again I have not updated very much this year, but I do plan on getting back to it. So then look for me near the bottom of the standings in labor too.
Amazing, Matt. No, fantastic stuff. Ruve, want to just tell everyone where we can see your stuff?
You can follow me on Twitter at X at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out all these injury updates as they come. I also have a weekly article on Rotoball discussing all the injuries I discussed there. I just discussed pitchers, but if you want to get all the hitter insight, they're in the article too.
All right, I'm Ariel Cohen. You can see my stuff over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer. I'm on Twitter /X at ATCNY. And, of course, the Beat the Shift podcast. We'll be off the next couple of weeks as Ruben and I are going on our summer vacation. Well needed. But we'll be back right after Labor Day. I'll probably do 1 or 2 episodes to take you to the end of the season. And then, of course, we'll wrap it up and put a bow on the year. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode and for the whole year. Once again, thank you so much to Matt Martingale of Elias Sports Bureau for coming on the show and doing a fantastic job. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.